Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. What role might Canada play amid a Gaza peace deal? We'll talk about that up first. And this morning, the BC government put forward legislation on the future of the Vancouver Park Board. It would require the city to hold a referendum to get rid of the Park Board. Justin McElroy will be here. We'll also talk to the chair of the Vancouver Park Board. And you can let us know, would you vote to keep or dissolve it? After 12:30, we will dish on fall comfort foods. Tell us your favorite. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. The news of peace in Gaza is being greeted with excitement and optimism. The first phase of a deal was signed off by both Israel and Hamas earlier today in Egypt. A full ceasefire in Gaza could come into effect within 24 hours. The sounds of people in both Israel and Gaza celebrating the prospect of peace. Some of the toughest, most contentious issues have yet to be hammered out. Under the first phase, Hamas will release Israeli hostages within 72 hours, possibly Monday or Tuesday. In exchange, Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israeli troops will also start withdrawing from parts of Gaza. And much-needed aid will also begin flowing to Palestinians. The sense of optimism is being felt across the world. U.S. President Donald Trump helped broker the deal. He spoke to reporters about the deal during a cabinet meeting earlier today.
Last night, we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. Peace in the Middle East. We secured the release of all of the remaining hostages, and they should be released on Monday or Tuesday. We're going to see to it. Gaza is going to be slowly redone. You have tremendous wealth in that part of the world by certain countries, and just a small part of that, what they make will do wonders for Gaza. And I think you're going to see some tremendous countries stepping up and putting up a lot of money and taking care of things.
Here in Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney says this is a day of optimism and that there may be a role for Canada in the days ahead. For more on what that may look like, I'm joined by JP Tasker. He's a senior reporter with CBC's Parliamentary Bureau. He joins us from Ottawa. Hi, JP. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
There has been much anticipation for the parties to reach this point in the days leading up to this morning. Can you tell me what is the feeling in Ottawa this morning?
I think there's just a tremendous sense of relief among the politicians we've spoken to so far here on Parliament Hill. Obviously, it's been a hugely fraught political issue for a long time after that brutal attack on Israel on October 7th and on all the brutality that we've seen in Gaza since then. A lot of politicians feeling uneasy about the situation. The federal government has been calling for a ceasefire for well over a year at this point, trying to make something like that happen. And it really seemed like peace was not obtainable until recently. And so we're hearing a lot of positivity about U.S. President Donald Trump today. A lot of politicians, including the Prime Minister, praising Donald Trump for bringing this together, for getting people to sit around that table and hammer out a deal. Some optimism that this actually might hold, that President Trump, he has an unusual way of conducting diplomacy. But in this instance, Canadian politicians are maybe a little thankful that he was able to get something done.
And so when it comes to the Prime Minister, what has he said about the deal and about Canada's role?
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister was just in Washington this week, meeting, of course, with Donald Trump, and they were discussing principally trade. But we do know from officials that we've spoken to, senior government sources that were privy to these discussions, that the Middle East was a major point of discussion between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Donald Trump. Donald Trump obviously had this top of mind earlier this week. He was thinking about what was going to come together. And so the two men did discuss a path forward, and he was bending Carney's ear about what he'd like to see. And we saw some of that reflected in the Prime Minister's comments this morning. Have a listen.
I want to salute, of course, President Trump, whose decisive leadership has made this possible, Mr. Kushner, Mr. Witkoff, the Qataris, the Egyptians, Turkey, who've been essential to getting to this moment. The next 48 hours are crucial. We urge the parties, particularly Hamas, to follow through, release all the hostages, and including the deceased hostages.
So Prime Minister Mark Carney is saying that this peace agreement really hangs on Hamas, and if it's going to release the Israeli hostages, the dozens of Israeli hostages it's had in captivity for 2 years now, if they don't come through with that plan to release them, then the rest of the peace deal is kind of hanging. It's not necessarily going to be a good thing. So, Mark Carney just trying to, I think, temper expectations a little bit, saying that really it's up to Trump and the pressure he's put on Hamas to deliver those hostages if we want to see the next steps of a possible peace plan be implemented in the coming days.
Right, and that deal, it does need to actually be implemented. So when it comes to that, how much influence does Canada have in that process?
Well, Canada, if we're to believe what senior government officials are telling us, is very actively involved in a post-war Gaza conversation. There is talk about a possible transnational sort of peacekeeping force being deployed to Gaza if peace can be established in the coming days. And there may be a role for Canada to play in all of that. It's interesting that this is being bandied about now because the Prime Minister telegraphed a few weeks ago that if there is peace, Canada might be called on to help protect the people of Gaza, to act as a buffer of sorts between the people in Gaza and Israel, obviously not acting alone. This would be something akin to a UN peacekeeping force where there would be other nations involved. But those are active conversations that are going on right now. And it does speak to the fact that Canada is something of a player in these conversations. Canada is not on the outs. Canada is very much having conversations with Trump. We also learned that Prime Minister Carney had a call with Tony Blair, the former British Prime Minister, earlier this week. He has been tasked by Trump to potentially lead what he is calling a board of peace. Tony Blair, very active in the region for many years, has been tasked by Trump to sort of keep an eye on things in a post-war Gaza. Also speaking to Jared Kushner, the Prime Minister did. So Mark Carney is certainly inserting himself into all these discussions in Canada, not a bit player in a possible post-war Gaza situation.
And in those discussions, there is still a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And so how has that factored into those conversations, into Canada's diplomacy with Israel?
Yeah, well, Canada has been concerned about humanitarian aid not getting into Gaza in the quantities they believe it should be. They're concerned that, the people of Gaza are not getting adequate help and attention. And now there is some hope, there is some optimism that with this possible peace agreement being implemented in the coming days, that they'll be able to move a lot more humanitarian aid into the region because that is part of Trump's peace plan. Once this agreement has been implemented, once Hamas and Israel agree to the terms, humanitarian aid will start to flow right away. We heard from Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand just a short while ago about that issue. Let's have a listen.
We are advocating at all times for the flow of humanitarian aid, and that should be unimpeded. Canada's put on the table $340 million. We're the third highest bilateral donor of humanitarian aid, largely through international organizations, and we will be continuing to advocate for the release of hostages, a sustainable ceasefire, and, of course, humanitarian aid that flows unimpeded.
So Canada has been stockpiling aid. It is ready to deploy that aid with its partners in the region to the people of Gaza. We just have to see how the next 48 hours or so play out to see whether there is a safe path to get that aid distributed.
All right, and so as we see how the agreement does play out in the coming days or weeks, what about long term? What will you be looking for when it comes to a long-term Canadian role in keeping peace?
Yeah, I mentioned that military deployment, a possible military deployment or peacekeeping function. We'll see, whether we actually have the capacity to do something like that. Because as you know, Michelle, we are a bit stretched when it comes to the Canadian Armed Forces right now. It really has been depleted. It doesn't have a ton of resources. There's issues with personnel. We're also actively involved in Europe right now. We have Operation Reassurance, which is working, a Canadian operation in Latvia, protecting the eastern flank of NATO. We have Operation Unifier, sort of training up Ukrainian troops to take on Russia as well. Those are two major deployments that are, taking up our limited resources. So we'll see if we have the capacity to actually contribute in a substantial way to a possible peacekeeping force in Gaza. But that is certainly where our attention should be turning next. Once peace is secured, there's going to be a requirement, a need for someone to try and keep it, and that's where Canada might play a role. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that as we move ahead.
Very much a developing story and lots to watch for sure. JP, thank you very much.
Thank you.
JP Tasker with CBC's Parliamentary Bureau, senior reporter based in Ottawa. It's 12:16 now. You're with BC Today. Now, here in BC, we talked yesterday on the show about a road rage incident in North Vancouver. One person was sent to hospital this past weekend. We asked for your experiences and how you deal with road rage, and we had several guests on the show yesterday and got these emails too. Cyprian writes, I love the show on road rage. I have sons who are new drivers and watch their horror at my driving. I have decided to take some refresher courses to correct the many aggressive habits that have built up over the last several decades. Now, Mike wrote us, and Mike is a longtime driver instructor. And he writes, as I tell all my people, we just need to find the person named the other guy and take away their license, right? We are all perfect, of course. We would all be perfect after that. Now, we all have errors. Thank you, Mike. Barbara writes, I received counseling for road rage, which normally really helps me. When I see a driver driving erratically and that it directly involves me, my anger does ramp up. So I have a little stop sign above the steering wheel that I look at. It interrupts my train of thought, and then it redirects my mind, and I can ratchet down. David writes, says, one thing that gets me frustrated is an increase in U-turns in Vancouver. I try not to react, but if they're close, I certainly honk my horn. Thank you very much for all of your emails. Again, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. (12:18) now. You're with BC Today. Thanks for joining us. Well, this morning, the provincial government put forward legislation that could mark the end of Vancouver's elected park board. Housing Minister Christine Boyle says the bill would allow the city council to dissolve the park board, but first, a referendum would have to take place. Now, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim had been pushing to eliminate the park board and fold the city's parks and recreation under council's control. So we're taking your calls on this. What do you think? Should the Vancouver Park Board continue to exist, or should it be dissolved? How would you vote in a referendum? You can call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can also leave a comment by email, bctoday@cbc.ca. If you're joining us on TikTok, you can leave a comment there. Thanks for joining us and watching us on our TikTok Live. Well, I'm joined by two guests now. Justin McElroy is CBC's Municipal Affairs reporter. He's here with me in studio. And also with me in studio is Laura Christensen, the chair of the Vancouver Park Board. Welcome to both of you. Laura, thank you very much for coming in. Very short notice, of course, as this broke this morning. I'll get to your reaction first, but let me get the lay of the land from Justin here. What happened this morning?
Yeah, so people might remember that 22 months ago, Mayor Ken Sim said that he wanted to get rid of the park board, which is independently elected with 7 commissioners, including Laura right here, and be folded in. He had forward a motion to council expressing that he wanted that change because the Vancouver Charter, which oversees the city and says what the role of the park board is provincial legislation that needs provincial sign-off. So the province hemmed and hawed on this for a couple years, deciding what to do because this is a politically divisive issue. It is politically risky in some ways. And so they decided to essentially come to a compromise solution, which is to say that, yes, you can get rid of the park board if you want City of Vancouver, but it just can't be City Council who says it. It has to be from the will of voters in a referendum. So 50% plus one. We'll see if the city goes ahead with it. As Ken Sim has indicated, they probably will, but he's looking over the legislation right now, whether that happens in next year's local elections or separately. But it sets the stage for once and for all, after 2 years of this debate going on, the public getting to decide finally and to determine whether the park board continues to exist or not.
Yeah, the timing is interesting too, as we head towards that local election next year. Laura, I'm just trying to pull up your X account here to see if you've made any comments, but what was your reaction today?
You know, it's all very fresh. You just found out this morning. But overall, you know, I think we're really happy to get some clarity here. And I think we're really happy that the province has agreed that the public should have input into this. You know, when the mayor announced this in 2023, you know, he really had no mandate to call for the dissolution of the park board. When he, you know, ran in 2022, he ran a full slate of park board commissioners on, you know, fixing the park board and making Parks and Recreation better. He never ran on dissolving the park board. So for, you know, the government, the provincial government to agree that this is something that the public needs input on, I really agree with. So I'm happy to see that the public is going to have an input onto the future of the park board and how their Parks and Recreation are governed in Vancouver.
I want to ask you about, you know, what he did run on was, you know, fiscal wisdom. And so when it comes to how much the city council or the city can save once the park board is dissolved, what about that?
You know, he's thrown around some numbers, but I have seen zero backup of where those numbers have come from. You know, park board commissioners don't make a huge salary. And all of the roles that Parks and Recreation does would still happen. It would just be, instead of an elected board, it would just be another department within the city. So I don't see a huge opportunity for savings. You know, there was a huge efficiency push about 10 years ago that resulted in a lot of, you know, the efficiencies that you might see between two organizations that were already found. So there's really not a ton of, I think, savings to be had by getting rid of the elected park board. It would all just get rolled into another city department, and those roles would have to be picked up by City Council, who are already incredibly busy.
Justin, go ahead. Do you have any questions for Laura before I go to our callers?
Yeah, no, but it's important to remember that part of the argument is cost, but part of it also is just efficiency. And over the years, part of the reason this has become a political issue is that there's been a number of times where the park board and council have been on loggerheads on issues, whether it's encampment in parks, whether it's the state animals in captivity, all sorts of different things where you have two different elected bodies. The park board is one of the few independently elected park boards in North America. If you're for the park board, you say that that is something that keeps a check on our green spaces, has independent accountability. If you're against it, you might say it creates a lot of log jams and bureaucratic back and forth. But now the public is going to have to think about those two arguments themselves if a referendum comes to be on this.
Do you feel like you have to make that argument then?
You know, I think it really is. It could be either way. You know, there is some efficiency perhaps to be gained of only having one body to decide. But if you look at the history of the park board, if you look at English Bay, for example, the reason that we have a continuous waterfront park along English Bay is because we had the park board who were there as a long-term planning to, you know, slowly buy up those properties and create that waterfront park. You know, had it been left to City Council, perhaps they would have sold that land for development. So the park board is really this sort of checks and balances on City Council to protect our parks and recreation space and to plan for them for the future.
Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, and, you know, there's lots of arguments that have come up through the years when you look at the history of how our parks have been created. It's also important to remember that, you know, over the years when we've seen polling on this issue, Vancouverites have been split on this. So it's going to be really fascinating when you strip away how this announcement happened and how Ken Sim was trying to get rid of it, which caused division. And part of the reason why the park board chair is no longer part of ABC, how voters think just independently of everything that might have happened happened over the last 4 years or the last decade, but independent of all that, whether they still want an independent park board.
That's what I was going to ask you, actually, was what do we know in terms of public support and where it lands right now? If a referendum goes through, I guess that will be the deciding factor. But we're going to ask our callers now. Let us know, how would you vote on the future of the Vancouver Park Board? So the BC government has tabled legislation that says, okay, the City of Vancouver, if you would like to dissolve the Park Board, Vancouver City Council, you're going to have to hold a referendum. Okay, so we're asking you, would you vote to keep the Park Board or dissolve it? You can call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or hit pound 690 on your cell phone. We have an email from Donna who writes, the Park Board serves as a buffer between Vancouver's glorious and unique parks and the potential for future city councils to monetize and commercialize our cherished natural spaces. Thank you. And that's Donna, who's a resident of Vancouver, emailing us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Let's take some calls here. Rod in North Vancouver, what are your thoughts about this potential referendum on the future of the Vancouver Park Board?
I'd definitely keep the Parks Board. I mean, if you saw this last episode with the government the city council wants to put a 6-story parking lot in Stanley Park. They want to pave over Stanley Park to create a parking lot. I mean, it sounds like Joni Mitchell all over again, but it's happening today. And there's so much distrust of Mayor Sims. He spent $21 million to log Stanley Park. What kind of parks conservation is that? I mean, there's so much. I just don't trust him. I've got a feeling that he wants to control the parks in order to build all kinds of development in the parks.
Okay. And may I ask you, Rod, you're in North Vancouver, certainly a place where there is, a place of beautiful park spaces. So what is it about this one of only 2 elected park boards that is unique in terms of, as we heard in an email, creating that buffer? Why do we need a separate elected park board to be able to do that?
Well, because you're one step removed from selling parks. If you have 6 people on city council, making decisions, that's a lot harder to deal with than having 2 boards. To be having 2 boards, it's another buffer to preserve the trees, because the trees don't really talk to. There's no people really talking for trees, because lots of times you have councils come in with politics and they're just pro-development, make money. So I think you need somebody to talk for the trees, and this is another buffer, having a Parks Board and then the City Council.
Thank you very much for the call, Rod. I'll get context from Justin in a moment, but let me go to you, Laura. Are you hearing Joni Mitchell in your voice? Do you see a risk here?
I think it is a potential risk. I can't speak for Ken Sims' intentions, but we have seen it in the history of Vancouver, where city councils have different priorities. They have housing to take care of and affordability, and they have all these priorities. Parks and Recreation isn't necessarily their number one priority, so they could in this case sell off parkland to have money to meet a different priority. So, that is one aspect of the Park Board, is that their number one priority is Parks and Recreation.
Okay. And so, Justin, what have we heard? You mentioned cost, efficiency. What about potential for development?
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of people bring this up. And on one hand, you can say there is no evidence of that. Ken Sim has been very clear that he doesn't want to sell off park space. Given the massive backlash we hear all the time when someone tries to bring it up, it would seem to me to be a political loser if someone tried to do this. However, that being said, people look at Sim and go, well, he also said that he wanted to keep the park board and ran a slate of candidates to be on the park board. And then 9 months after elected said, I don't think the park board should exist anymore. So it's a difficult sell with some people when he says, look, we promised to protect it. There's no evidence of us having any conversations or dealings that would imply we're trying to do something here. We want to enshrine it in. But this is where it's selling and making your case to the public where the rubber will hit the road.
I remember that announcement, and people calling in here. What did you see as what was behind that? Seems like a turn, right?
It does, but remember, he, for a couple years, campaigned on getting rid of the park board. In 2021 and 2022, he said that given different controversies that were going on at the time, including tent encampments and the park board and council being at different steps, that he was like, we need to get rid of it. Then suddenly, 6 months before the election, he changed his mind. He said, you know what, I want a park board. They're important. I think we can work with folks. From what I've heard in the years since, part of this was part of his base, potentially including West Side voters saying, look, the parks are very important to me. I'm only going to support you if you continue to hold this. I've heard also that he thought, with his business acumen, that he would be able to fix things that maybe in his mind hadn't in the past. Whatever the case may be, that flip-flop happening so quickly into his term made it hard for some people to fully trust what what the city would do if the park board was taken away and it was just part of the rest of the city of Vancouver.
Let's pause for a news update here. This is BC Today. It's 12:31. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michelle Elliott. My two guests right now, CBC's Municipal Affairs reporter Justin McElroy and Vancouver Independent Park Board Commissioner and Chair of the Vancouver Park Board, Laura Christensen, with us here in studio as well. This amid news for this morning, the BC government tabling legislation that would require Vancouver City Council to hold a referendum if it wants to take steps to dissolve the Vancouver Park Board. We're taking your calls. How would you vote in such a referendum? Again, our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Just hit pound 690 on your phone too, or email bctoday@cbc.ca. Watching your comments on our TikTok live as well. Right now it is 12:32, time for a CBC News update, and here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The provincial government has recruited former National Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan to help the province secure some of the billions of dollars the federal government will spend to boost the military. Jobs Minister Ravi Kahlon says Sajjan has agreed to advise the provincial government for free. Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised NATO that Canada would increase military spending to 5% of GDP in the next decade. New Westminster police are investigating what they're calling a swastika vandalism spree. 2 cars were found Saturday with the hate symbol and another on Monday. The case has been referred to the provincial hate crime unit. And the main road linking Port Alberni and Bamfield is set to reopen in 2 weeks after being closed by a wildfire for more than 2 months. The Transportation Ministry says crews have removed more than 1,000 dangerous trees on the slope along the Bamfield Main Road corridor. And now the BC forecast on the north coast. Sunny this afternoon with a high of 14. Highs up to 15 with lots of sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, clearing with a high of 10. Highs up to 21 and mainly sunny in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 21 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, some sun and cloud this afternoon with highs from 15 to 19. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob. That is Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You're with BC Today here on CBC. We're live on Radio 1, CBC Television, live streaming as well. I'm Michelle Elliott, and right now we are talking about the future of the Vancouver Park Board. So a development today, the provincial government put forward legislation that could pave the way for ending and dissolving Vancouver's elected park board. So Housing Minister Christine Boyle introduced a bill. So she says the bill would allow City Council to do so, but first a referendum would have to take place. And as we've been talking about, Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim for a couple of years has been pushing to eliminate the park board and fold Parks and Recreation into City Council. So let us know what you think. Would you vote to keep the Vancouver Park Board or dissolve it? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Email is bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm going to go to one of my guests here, Laura Christensen, who is the chair of the Vancouver Park Board. Why do we still need it?
I talked a little bit about this before, but it's really the separation between City Council and Park Board.
But others are not separated.
True. And I think if we look at the history of Vancouver in terms of how our parks have formed, the Park Board was created, and it's called the Park Board because at the time there was only one park. It was Stanley Park.
Right.
So the Park Board was created to protect Stanley Park from development. There's arguments on both sides. Everyone says there's, no one else has a park board, but is that a reason to get rid of something just because, that's the way everyone else does it? You can go either way on it, but I think the sort of having that second layer of accountability is something that I think Vancouverites have valued in the past. So it's really up to the public to decide of, do they want to roll that into City Council and have that be something that City Council can decide, or do they like having that second layer of accountability and protection for their parks and recreation spaces?
You're doing a good job of letting people make their own decision here, but you ran for Vancouver Park Board. What do you see, personally as a risk here?
The risk, I think, is that we lose some level of democracy over our parks and recreation spaces. If you've ever come to a park board meeting, you'll see we have speakers come out and talk about, fairly minor issues relative to the things that City Council talks about. Things that at City Council would just be a staff decision that would just happen and roll through. We have at the Park Board, and we discuss and we debate, and people come and speak. There's a higher level of scrutiny and transparency, I think, when we have the Park Board there to have the public, come and provide their input on decisions that impact them. Because ultimately, Parks and Recreation is, I think, the department that the public is interacting with the most. It's your rinks, your pools, your parks, your community centers. These are the things people use on a day-to-day basis, and people should really have a lot of input and accountability and transparency on the decisions around those things.
Justin?
And some people very much like that or like that it protects things. On the other hand, sometimes you have 5 years where you debate a single bike lane through Stanley Park, and there's endless meetings and consultations, and you have to deal with the City Council also having their own budget with things which tie the hands as well, and it creates those complications, right? And I think part of the tensions have been in the last 3 mayoral terms, we've had 3 different sorts of setups where we've had Vision running Vancouver Council, Vision running Park Board, we've had opposition on Park Board, we've had a split Vancouver Council and a split Park Board as well. The last 2 years we've had this situation where former ABC commissioners have broken away and now vote most of the time with the Green Party commissioner, and so there's a split there. And so it is a double-edged sword, and it gets to the heart of what local democracy is and how much we value consultation and transparency versus maybe efficiency and contradictions that happen at times.
And just getting things done. So, has it mired us in that unnecessary antagonism? It would be the other side of that.
But it's going to be interesting now where people will be able to, with a separate referendum, it's likely to happen during next year's local elections. I think if you're looking at the tea leaves and how much an individual referendum would cost, but it will mean that there will be a heightened focus on, instead of the Park Board at election time being one of 16 different issues that are talked about and get media attention and people talking. Now this will be a separate yes or no vote. It'll be very heightened. It'll allow people to make those arguments one way or the other. You're also probably going to have a weird situation where there's going to be people running for the Park Board without knowing whether it's going to exist afterwards.
There is that. Oh my goodness. How do you plan for that and try and shore up donations for your campaign? Let's take a couple calls here. Terry in Vancouver. Hi, Terry. You work for the Park Board.
I worked for the Park Board for 35 years as the communications person, and I know a little bit about the Park Board history. And I think one of the most prescient things the city ever did was, after one of their first resolutions to get, to lease Stanley Park from the federal government, was to set up a Park Board, a separate entity, to not only deal with that, but with future parks. And I think that over the last 100 years, they've done a pretty good job. But all the time, every time, it seems, depending on who was in power, of course, there were wonderful times, through the 50s and the 90s, when we did amazing things and built amazing facilities because we had very diverse boards and diverse council, not all one thing. But in doing that, they sometimes ran up against problems with money. And for at least 3 times over the 100 years, they petitioned council to petition the provincial government to have a separate mill rate for the park board. So if the city's budget gets approved, a certain mill rate or percentage automatically goes to the park board to do as they see fit, which would be a lot easier for the park board to get their goals done. Now, what's happened over the last 15 years is through a city manager that came about 15 or 16 years ago, they convinced the park board at that time that it would be more efficient to do facility maintenance through the city and not just the park board. We had people who were engineers for the aquatic center who switched over to the kids pool who were brilliant at what they did, and that was their dedication to one thing, right? It was done well, but in the last 15 years, that has slipped amazingly. It wouldn't have happened what happened at the aquatic center or kids pool, just as 2 examples. So I think it's very dangerous to go to a referendum because I think a lot of people, there needs to be a public campaign to even say what the park board does for hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, Terry, thank you.
If they do go to a referendum, they should have the mill rate question with it. If he wants to put it to a referendum, if they want to pick the park board, they pick a percentage of the government, the city of Vancouver, so they can do their job. That friction is necessary. It really is necessary, and Laura has said it very well. And I think we need to go forward with the park board. I mean, it's the largest, municipality of the 2 in Vancouver,
right.
in Canada. I'm sorry to talk so much, but I wanted to get a lot in.
Yeah, you did mention you were in communications, Terry. So I definitely hear that. Thank you very much for your call. Let's go to Rob in Vancouver. Hi, Rob.
Hi there.
Go ahead. What are your thoughts on the park board and its future?
Okay, well, I was speaking in front of the Parks Board the other day, which I think rather illustrates the fact that it provides a level of accountability and accessibility for Vancouver residents. Now, there's no doubt about it. Running the parks in this city is a complicated issue. We've got a huge variety, and there's a lot to protect. If this was wound up into City Council, it would become another subject within a very broad range of responsibilities. Having a dedicated parks board, which we've had instantly since I think the 1880s here, is an incredibly valuable opportunity for the public. If you've never been to a parks board meeting, it's not everybody's thing, but it really is worth sitting in on sometimes because there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of public consultation, and the parks board commissioners, lots of people want to speak against those guys. The reality is they do incredibly hard work, most of them, and they do represent the values of the people in Vancouver.
And you felt that it's given you access.
Because it's accessible, it's very important.
Okay, Rob, thank you so much for your call. Let's take one last call here. And Denise in Coquitlam. Hi, what are your thoughts on the future of the Vancouver Park Board?
Hi there. I'm really enjoying the conversation, and I'm appreciating that people are interested in protecting the Parks Board and the work that they do on behalf of the city. I'm connected with the horse racing community in Vancouver at Hastings Racecourse. I know the Park Board does not have jurisdiction over the P&E and that Hastings Park area, but the conversations that have been happening for me have been alarming about, we're going to build a stadium so that the Whitecaps can be there. So putting a stadium that would benefit a private entity on public land, to me, is not tenable. So I really am appreciating that people are speaking out in support of the Park Board, and that the province has a mechanism that the public will have a say on what it looks like going forward.
Okay, thank you very much for your call, Denise. Let's wrap up with Justin on that point, the points that you've heard there.
Yeah, and it really speaks to the ways that the park board and council intertwine, and those layers of accountability and being able to stop things happen. We don't have enough time to get into the history of Hastings Park and the P&A jurisdiction, but you look at, it's an interesting argument that we're hearing from some of these callers, which is vote to keep the park board to stop things from happening. And I think a challenge, if I can be a little bit direct to Laura, is it will have to expand. I think, for some people to talk about things the park board is currently doing, because Sim is going to hear those, well, you're not protected from this and that, and he's going to say, I don't like how the infrastructure for the pools and community centers is going. I don't like various things that he could point to. And while the park board can say, well, it's because of this or that, or we need a larger budget or more accountability, that will resonate with some people as well. So it's going to turn into some fascinating debates and discussions.
Yeah, and Terry brought it up, right, that the last 15 years, all the different kinds of challenges, that will be on people's minds. So what, I guess, in defense of the park board, Laura, what do you see then as the role of the park board if it were to continue?
You know, I think Terry brought up a really interesting point about the mill rate and the budget issue, and the fact that the park board really gets its money from city council, which does create some of that tension. You know, and I think there's right now it's a very topical issue with the budget coming up right now. You know, the mayor has proposed to hold property taxes, which really translates to very significant cuts to the park board. So, you know, is this sort of how he's going to manage Parks and Recreation moving forward, by slashing our budget and resulting in service cuts? So I think we need to have the park board there to sort of stand up for park board. Ideally, you know, as Terry mentioned, you know, there could be some mechanism for a mill rate or taxation. That's sort of outside of this discussion right now. But I do think there is a question about, you know, how would mayor and council manage park board from a budget perspective if they had full control? You know, it seems like the way that mayor and council are going right now is to slash our budget. So what's the future forward? It's hard to say, and I think that having the park board is a critical component to have a voice for Parks and Recreation rather than having it just rolled into mayor and council.
Very good to have you both. Thank you so much. And Laura, thanks for coming in on such short notice. That's Laura Christensen, Independent Vancouver Park Board Commissioner and Chair of the Park Board, CBC's own Municipal Affairs reporter, Justin McElroy. It is now 12:46. You're here with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott, and we are just about to take your calls on the fall weather, which is now here, and of course the comfort foods that we like to turn to in these colder, cooler times. We're also going to talk a little bit about your emails now on road rage, because we had this on the show yesterday as our topic, and lots of emails for sure on that too. Brittany writes, I wanted to inquire about how to drive more defensively, since others don't want to use the tools of their vehicles, or they don't use the rules of the roads themselves. I find I'm a fairly good defensive driver, but it is more challenging when people don't use their blinkers to signal where they are going or do wide turns, either left or right. Where I currently live, there's an intersection near my home that is always bogged down because everybody does these wide left-hand turns that they cause lineups in the middle of the intersection. Okay, thank you very much. Art writes as well, this is a very useful discussion. I can imagine anyone listening and nodding their head saying, yep, that's me. I have encountered that too. I think the common denominator is time. There's never enough of it in the day. And when we're driving, we experience this acutely. Perhaps if we all got ourselves to allow 10 to 15 minutes more for wherever we're going, we would experience less anxiety and frustration due to all those inescapable factors that do slow us down. And Dave writes from Coquitlam, it would be nice to see some enforcement of speed. Saturday morning on the #1 highway in Vancouver is ridiculous. I know RCMP have competing priorities, but that might begin to tone down some driving behaviors. Thank you very much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca. $12:48 now. You're with BC Today. Well, Thanksgiving is just a few days away, and yes, as we watch the leaves turn color, the weather get cooler, we are talking about our comfort foods, those cozy soups and pies and casseroles. We would love to hear from you. Call us now. Let us know what is your favorite fall comfort food. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Our email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And as always, we are watching your comments on TikTok. My guest is Marianne Smeaton. Now, she's an aspiring chef in Fort St. John and is competing in this season of MasterChef Canada. And I'm very excited to hear about her go-to dish because it very much fits this bill. Hello, Marianne. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I see a beautiful, wide landscape behind you. Are you in Fort St. John right now?
I am currently in Fort St. John at the Safeway parking lot.
I don't see the Safeway, thank goodness. I do see the highway,
Yes, no.
but beautiful blue sky. So how
Yes.
exciting is this for you to compete at MasterChef Canada?
Oh my goodness, it's been a wonderful experience, and I am just thrilled to be able to represent BC.
How did you come to be an aspiring chef? Because you have quite the backstory here.
Yes, well, first of all, my parents immigrated from Switzerland and started a cattle ranch. So growing up, everything was farm to table, cooking from scratch. And so I think that's kind of where my love of food developed. Then later on in life, I became an RN and started spending a little bit more time in the kitchen as I have 2 kids. And that passion kind of reignited.
Okay, and so you started cooking more and more. And so, did you leave your work as a nurse?
Yes. So after my second, my daughter, I decided not to return back to nursing. I decided to pursue food, and as well as I bought some cows, and we just started to do some cattle ranching as well.
Yeah, what were those early days like? What were your favorite meals to make?
Oh my goodness. There's so many meals. Just growing up, any kind of soup, my mom could make the best soup. And that to me, that is comfort food at its finest.
What kind of soup?
So it would make the potato would be always like a potato and leek soup. And there was also this one, and this is super nostalgic. I don't think people would appreciate it as much as I appreciate it. But whenever I was sick, she would just make a really good beef broth. And then she would crack 2 eggs inside of it. And when you kind of put your spoon through that egg, the yolk would ooze out.
Oh,
and
yes.
that to me, it was comfort food. It's what I was fed when I was sick. And so that's like the nostalgia.
Oh my goodness. I've been eyeing my potatoes on my counter, just like I need to make a potato and leek soup. But
Yes.
your go-to dish is another one that really just makes me feel all cozy and warm inside. Tell us about your favorite dish to make right now.
So right now I have been loving this barley risotto, and I make it with butternut squash.
Oh.
It's something that kind of risotto to me is one of those, I don't know if romantic is the best words to make, but I love making it. Yes, and of course you have to watch it. So I have my little glass of wine, and the kids are playing in the background, and I'm stirring, and it comes out as this big hug on a plate. So that right now is at the top of my list.
Oh, and I love that you put butternut. I'm basically just all things butternut squash. That is my fall comfort food. And you're right, you do have to watch it very closely and stir and stir. Do you have any tips or tricks for us to get it right, that texture,
You're right. Yeah, absolutely. With risotto, I always tell my guests, we will eat when the risotto is ready, because the risotto waits for nobody, right? And so the barley is a nice alternative to the rice, because I do find that it's a little bit more forgiving. So if you are having maybe a dinner party or having some guests over, it can stay, sitting for a couple minutes before, and it will still have that chew to it. But what I always say for risotto, when you're finishing up, keep it nice and loose, because it is going to tighten as it sits. Yeah.
Okay, tell us more about that. Okay, so just if you can elaborate on that step.
Yes, absolutely. So when you're making a risotto, you are adding your liquid, typically like a warm stock of some sort.
Right.
I use chicken stock for my risotto. And so you're spooning that in. You want that to absorb before you add your second ladle, and you're just continually adding that liquid and letting it absorb. And so at the end, when you're doing your last ladle and it's just about done, make sure that there's enough liquid in that pan, because then if you're going to add your parm at the end, that will also absorb. And so you just want to make sure that it's just not too tight.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. Risotto doesn't wait for anybody, but also
no, it does
you
not.
have to wait for it, actually.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Let's go to our caller now. Again, we're asking you, what's your favorite fall comfort dish? We've been talking about butternut squash barley risotto with Marianne Smeaton, who is a contestant in this season's MasterChef Canada. She's a cattle rancher in Fort St. John, beautiful Fort St. John. And 1-800-825-5950 if you want to get your call in, 604-669-3733. Let's go to beautiful Vernon, and Chris is on the line. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Hi, what's your favorite fall comfort food?
It's got to be anything braised, but in particular braised beef short ribs.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Tell us how you make it.
Oh yeah, you start with your mirepoix and you brown off the meat, and the key ingredient I use is Marsala wine as well as red wine. Beef stock, and you braise it for about 3.5-4 hours until the meat's just so tender.
Hearty.
And it's quite easy to just take your short ribs out, keep them warm, and thicken your sauce, reduce it down a little bit, serve it over mashed potatoes or polenta.
Oh,
amazing.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking of how hearty and comforting that is. Chris, thank you very much. Yes, Marianne, soups and stews and anything braised. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, short ribs are divine. I love short ribs, and I love the addition of the masala wine. Oh, so good. Yes.
Very, very good touch. You know, I love when you can see the meat just fall off.
Yes.
And you just know that is going to be so nice and tender. Trudy writes us, a big pan of mixed roasted seasonal vegetables. I just had this last night. And apple crisp are our go-tos this time of year. Trudy, thank you very much. And you raised dessert. Do you have a favorite dessert this time of year, Marianne?
I mean, I love my sweets. I'm not much of a baker, but I do love eating all the baked goods. But right now, my go-to is a pumpkin scone.
Oh yeah, anything pumpkin. Again, any of those gourds, butternut squash, and pumpkins for sure. What's your experience like? I know no spoilers on MasterChef Canada, but what's your experience like? What's it like to compete there?
I mean, it's incredible. First and foremost, like meeting the contestants, all of them are just amazing people. And I had such an honor and privilege to be able to meet them and to have conversations with them. The experience, I mean, it is by far the craziest thing that I've ever done. Totally outside of my comfort zone, but truly, truly enjoyed the experience. I'm excited to watch the rest of the season, excited to what, is to come. All good things.
I'm sure your family is waiting right with you while you you make your risotto, having your wine.
Yes, they are. Absolutely.
Well, we are fingers crossed for you, Marianne. Thank you so much for joining us. What a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Marianne Smeaton is a cattle rancher in Fort St. John, an aspiring chef who is competing in this season of MasterChef Canada on CTV. That is it for our show. Thanks so much for all of your calls, your emails too. Again, it's bctoday@cbc.ca.